Hey everybody, how you doing?
That's very cute. Thank you.
Um, well, he's back. Yeah, great. So today is going to be a two-parter, and we're talking about the grandparents. Smile, Dad.
I'm smiling.
So the first part of our conversation is his family, his parents. So go ahead, Dad. Take it away.
Grandparents. Well, interesting group of people. Um, my grandparents on my mother's side, my grandfather came from Demopolis, Alabama. My grandmother came from a town in Ohio. I don't remember the name, but they met during the early 1900s. Were married. My grandfather was a World War One veteran. He served as a construction worker. At the time, he was in one of those units that were not really allowed to do a lot of fighting, so they did other tasks and chores. He was a construction worker. She was a housewife. They got together, married, moved to Alabama. Um, and raised a family there and stayed for a while, then migrated towards New Jersey. Uh, my grandparents on my father's side, my grandmother is part Native American, uh, part Cherokee, and my grandfather was, interestingly enough, from Ohio as well. Uh, they got together, migrated towards New Jersey into the Union County area. Uh, raised both sets of grandparents raised large families. I had a lot of aunts and uncles on both sides. Many of them are passed on, but there was always a large family. Uh, Lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins to deal with and play with. And then those were good relationships to have. Uh, Learned a lot of lessons from both sets of families that still hold true with me today. That's about it. All my grandparents are gone. I have a few uncles left on my father's side, but it's interesting when you think about grandparents and you remember them in your mind as to how old they were. Not that that was a bad thing necessarily, but they just seem so old in comparison to everybody else because they were older. And the dynamics of life and age are that now I am in the shoes of my grandparents. I'm not a grandfather, but I'm as old as they were. So uh, I am them, as Pogo used to say, uh, paraphrasing somewhat. Anyway, that's it for me.
Dad, I meant your parents.
You met my father.
No, no,
You met my mother.
they don't know about them.
On my, but you never met my father's father or my mother's mother. They were both long gone before you were born.
I know, but I want to talk about Grandma and Grandpa.
Why?
We have to, Dad. It's family. We have to.
Let's not say we did.
No, we have to, Dad.
Hmm. The person she's referring to, my mother, her grandmother, uh, was an interesting lady. That by itself is enough for an episode. I'll just briefly refer to her.
We'll talk about her in another episode, too.
Um,
But go ahead, Dad.
she was the third oldest child of my grandparents on my mother's side. Was able to finish the 10th grade, which was an amazing achievement at that time because in the South, going to school was considered a luxury. Um, the fact that she was able to complete a 10th grade education was amazing because neither of my grandparents ever went further than the fifth grade. So for her to go to school at all while the rest of the kids were working was amazing. That helped the family, so it wound up being a good thing. And the sacrifice they made for her to go to school and not go to the fields allowed them to have a person in the family who was educated to a certain extent and was able to help the family navigate through life in the South. My mother took it as long as she could. Then she decided that the best thing for her to do with her child at the time, my older brother, was to head to a better land. So she left and headed north to New Jersey. But that'll be story number 2, continued at a later date.
How about Grandpa?
Grandpa, my father.
Mm-hmm.
My mother and father met at Camp Kilmer. One of the jobs that my mother was able to acquire when she got up here was a hostess at Camp Kilmer. Her and my aunt, who eventually came up, were able to get jobs as hostesses in the club where the returning soldiers from the war, which would be World War II actually, came for R&R, rest and recreation, or rest and relaxation, however you want to characterize it. We have pictures of her and my aunt dressed up when they came into the service area that night, and I guess the term is they were fly, and they caught many an eye, and one of those eyes was my father. They got together, eventually were married, and produced me and my sister. But that's another time for another tale later on, too. I'll talk about that later.
We'll talk more, and then we'll get on to Mom's family.